Today's scripture is Acts 2:42-47. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayers. Awe came upon everyone because of the many wonders and signs being done through the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had need. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the good will of all the people. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved.
They devoted themselves to teaching and fellowship. They prayed. They ate. Lots of wonders and signs. Okay. They sold all their possessions? It's kind of the sticky point on it. Like, we can kind of read, but what? Distribute the proceeds as to all as any had. They had all things in common? I mean, I like y'all, but... So when you get a bunch of scholars together talking about this, like, one of the questions is going to be, did this actually ever really happen? It brings to mind a writing by Plato called Critias, and written about 400 years before this passage. Plato's talking about ancient Athens, and he uses almost the exact same words about how everyone in ancient Athens, this wonderful place, shared all things in common, and no one had any personal property whatsoever. And so when you hear things like this that sound utopian, you say, well, did this actually happen? I mean, it didn't last, right? I mean, maybe it happened, but that's not what we're doing. We're generous, but there's a point. So scholars tend, when they talk about this passage, they tend to be pretty skeptical. Do you know what fundamentalists do when they talk about this passage? I don't either, because they don't. They don't know. The church I grew up in, the fundamentalist church I grew up in, wanted to be like the first century church. That was the whole point, being like the first century church. Just, not that one. Did it happen? Maybe. Maybe what Luke is saying is aspirational, like this is what church should be, so I'm going to say it happened, so everybody's like, let's do that. Maybe it's one of those things that's kind of in the middle, where it happened for some folks at one point, and from then on, folks kind of looked back and said, remember that? Remember that thing? That was pretty neat. I don't know. I don't know. It's. I think it probably happened at some level. It didn't last, that's for sure. It's a hard way to live, right? It's a hard way to live. All it takes is one person hanging out and playing the communal Xbox while I'm doing the gardening to make me reconsider our arrangements, right? And people. This is going to come as a shock to y'all, but. People are messy. We all got our stuff. We're messy. And when you put a bunch of people together, do you know what you got? Chaos. A bunch of mess. Yeah. Yeah, yep. And what Luke says here we know is true, that the church was growing constantly. So I mean, it's one thing to be messy, but it's another thing to have new messes coming in all the time, right? The culture's changing all the time. This group is growing. I tend to think it happened, at least in some places. I'm sure it did. Your mileage may vary, but the reality was, and this is really hard for us to grok, this is really hard for us to get, for us to be aware of, Christianity was an underground cult. right? And you know, the church that Luke is talking about is the church in Jerusalem that existed about 20 years or so before Luke is writing what he's writing. And the people in that church distrusted and were distrusted by their own faith family, their larger faith family, right? They were Jews who believed in Jesus, which made them suspect and suspicious of Jews who didn't believe in Jesus. And they were hated by Roman culture. So they were just their little people. And I think they probably came together in ways that seem really foreign to us because desperate groups understand something that we tend to forget, which is they have to have each other. They have to have it's literally, for some groups, a matter of life and death. You know, I think we lost some things in 325. You can Google that. When we decided that we were going to be in charge and we're willing to make all sorts of concessions for that, I think we lost a lot. But I think one of the things that we lost is we created for ourselves choices. So, you know, if somebody sits in the place where you're used to sitting on Sunday morning, or the pastor says something stupid, which happens a lot, or somebody doesn't like your casserole, there's another great church with a fantastic pastor 3 blocks away, right? You can go, we can walk, we make choices because we lost this sense that we really, really need each other. The church I grew up in, it was as far from an underground group as it is possible to be. It was as mainstream in my little culture as it was possible to be. And you know, the irony is, tragically, that church and churches like that were the reason that other groups had to go underground. And I'm not trying to demonize Christianity. I'm not trying to demonize the church I grew up in. They did a lot of great people are messy. Most of us stand for justice in some areas at the same time we're impeding justice in other areas. That's just, people are just messy. But it makes me wonder, thinking about the irony of a church that wanted to be like the first century church, actually creating groups that were far more like the first century church than it was. What communities today would most resemble the first century church in how they rely on each other, and how they're brought together, and how they see and act and move in the world? Communities that we as Christians could learn from. There are these times when you see, you know, it's like when you're a kid and you have your first sleepover, right? And you go to somebody else's house, and you're like, oh, they don't eat dinner together every night like we do. They kind of do their own thing. Or oh, they brush their teeth before they put on their PJs, which is so different than we do, and it rocks your world. When you see other ways of doing things, it can kind of, you know, it can shape you, it can change you. And I remember one of those in 2005. Had recently moved from the evangelical church I was part of to a United Christian Church, which was a United Church of Christ in Austin. And there was a talent show. It was put on by Dottie Casey, who was our Dotsy Carpenter, which confused me for a long time when I got here, by the way. But Dottie put it on, and it was a talent show, and we had been there for like 2 months. So, you know, I wanted to be part of that and be kind of work into the social fabric, and you know, I wanted to impress my new friends. So I worked on a song and practiced it and got it smooth, and I think I played it. I don't remember what I did at all. Like, I don't remember any. I think I did a song. but I don't remember what it was. What I remember about that night was a young man who came to play a cover of a Beatles tune. And so he sits down at the electric piano. This is a pretty low-rent situation. He sits down at the electric piano and starts to play, and it's Hey Jude. And it's he was playing a pretty simple version of the piece. And he got kind of into the, opening stop. He was nervous. Got into the first verse and kind of made it through a line or two and then had to stop and pull back and started over from that line again. And kept going. And then this amazing thing happened because he would try, he was trying to keep going, right? And then what do you think people did? They started singing. Right? It was this incredible, and I'm looking around because I'm sitting there like I'm in cringe mode, right? Because I'm just thinking, oh no, this stinks for this guy, like, so I'm with him, but then I look around, and the thing is, nobody else is in cringe mode. Nobody else is like, I couldn't imagine a world in which, when that moment happens, you're not cringing. It's not awkward. It's an opportunity to sing along and turn this talent show into, look at the talent you have in bringing us together. And the group carried him through the finish line. And it completely reoriented my imagining of what a talent show is. I don't remember what I did. But 20 years ago, it's all I can do not to mention his name. I'm trying not to mention it. 20 years ago, I remember what this guy did. I remember how it changed me toward the United Church of Christ. I was already getting there, but it's like there's something different happening here. There's something different, and I need to learn from this. Still remember it. You know what? Darndest thing happened again 11 days ago. A couple weeks ago, I preached and went home, took my pastor nap, and then went to the airport, got on a flight to go to North Carolina. And I was going to visit my best buddy. He and his wife are very into the local theater down there. And so they were doing all sorts of their theater stuff. But one of their theater friends had a performance that week on Thursday night, and they asked me, hey, would you be willing to go to check out this performance? And I'm like, sure, why not? What else are we going to do? That's cool. And so that's how a week ago Thursday, I found myself at my first ever drag show. Well, then it's about time. So are you going to get one set up for us?
You're going to be in it?
No. Okay. She said it's about time. She said she had never been to one, Becky, so I asked her if she was going to set one up for us, to which she responded, are you going to be in it? I wear a robe every week.
We could find something fancy to go under.
I tell you what, this was the most inclusive, empowering, affirming event since that talent show in 2005 that I've ever been at. It embodied love. The MC was a drag queen named Delighted to Be Here, which when I heard that name, Delighted, I was like, oh, I was expecting, I don't know, something misogyny or something, I don't know, but Delighted to Be Here, I just thought, that's not, but then I started thinking about that name. And I thought, what a powerful statement that is. Like, at one point that performer chose their name. And when they chose their name, they didn't know where they were going to be. Think about the statement of faith it takes to call yourself delighted to be here, not knowing where you're going to be. Hey, interesting side note. You know who else changed their name on a regular basis? First century Christians. How would you feel about renaming yourself Blessed Wherever I Am? Hey, I'm Ken. What are you? I'm blessed wherever I am. And Delighted was amazing. She was incredibly talented. It helped me see. It was like the first time I listened to Mos Def and recognized rap as this amazing art form. I was able to see drag as this art form that I had never bothered to notice. I didn't have any feelings about it before this because I'd never bothered to notice. And so Delighted was incredibly talented, but she was more than that. The amazement happened because of this other piece, which for the friend we were there to see, this was the first time they had ever done drag. And it turned out this was an amateur drag show, 10 acts, 4 of which had never done this before. And so Delighted began by, entertaining, silly, fun, amazing singing. And then she said, she described that these were folks who had never done this before, doing this for the first time. And so she said, we're going to practice supporting them. And so she had the group practice support. Cheer. Practice cheering. This is what you're going to do. And then at one point when we got good enough, she yelled at the backstage area and said, they're doing that for you. She said, for y'all, but she made space for everyone. Queer folks, allies, first-timers, old-timers. She said, this isn't exactly right, but it's as close as I can remember. We're going to be lighthouses for all the queer little kids out there who need to know that they can be themselves. And through the whole show, she reminded us of a bigger context. And the bigger context is a doozy, because this was on Thursday night. The day before, Wednesday, in the North Carolina House of Representatives, there had been a bill introduced that would outlaw all forms of what they called adult dress. It wouldn't outlaw it. It was a bill addressing all forms of dressing in another gender's attire. And it wouldn't criminalize it. What it would do is it would make it adult entertainment. So Mrs. Doubtfire would now be an adults-only event. And we can look at it and say how terrible that is and how silly that is, but it's one of 469 anti-queer bills that have been introduced in states across this country this year, 2 of which have been introduced in the Vermont State House. And I don't want to say all, but I'd put a good bit on 468 of those bills have been introduced by Christians in the name of Christian love, which, to be honest, looks to me a lot like Roman love must have looked to first century Christians. How do we lose our way so profoundly? I mean, maybe Becky's right. Maybe we just need to go to more drag shows. The thing that kept me up at night, because I was up a couple of nights after experiencing this, trying to process what I'd seen. The thing that kept me up at night was that some performers were objectively excellent. Like, it was a really good show. And when those performers came and performed, the crowd hooted and hollered, threw money, and Delighted was talking about how great they were and really encouraging and affirming. And then there were some folks less objectively great. The person we went to see, great stage presence. I'm not making this up. First step fell off the stage. Wig goes flying. Wardrobe malfunctions throughout the entire performance. And the person just kept, they were just on, it was wow. And then there was another person who, by any objective measure, not a performer, just not a performer. Didn't have a stage presence, didn't have a whole lot of an act, just, was visibly nervous, not a great performer. And do you know what happened when those folks performed? The crowd hooted and hollered. The crowd showered them with money, and Delighted told what a great, This is great. Let's hear it for these people. Delighted's powerful. The congregation's connection led us to where we all want to be. And I don't mean an amateur drag show in Travelers Rest, North Carolina, where those people, I mean where we all want to be. It's worth recognizing greatness of talent. I mean, let's just be honest. When Eric plays and when I play, those aren't the same thing. I mean, we can be honest about that. Those are two very different levels of skill. And it's possible to recognize that. But it's also possible to recognize not just greatness of talent, but greatness of dignity, greatness of humanity, greatness of worth, greatness of spirit. We can hold all of these at the same time. And isn't that the community that we want? I mean, imagine what the world would be like. Just let yourself, I know it's radical. It's like reading Luke and saying, what if they actually did that? But just imagine what that would look like. Now, I'm not up here trying to claim the queer community is a utopia any more than I'm trying to claim that the first century church was a utopia. People are messy. Queer folks are messy. First century Christians are messy. First century Christian queer folks are messy. And by the way, there were for sure some of them, because have you ever heard the passage, in Christ there is no male nor female? Think about it for a few minutes sometime. I don't know the queer community well enough to make generalizations. Idealizing a community is just another way of othering the community, because true personhood is messy. So I saw one drag show. Not seen every drag show. I saw one. So I'm not saying that that the queer community is a utopia. What I am saying is that for one night, for a few hours, I saw a glimpse of what utopia could be, of what the beloved community could look like. I experienced it at a drag show, and I was delighted to be there. And I'm delighted to be here. And think about how things would be if we were all delighted to be wherever we are. It's pretty cool to think that God is still revealing God's self to us, isn't it? It's pretty cool to wonder about all the different places we can learn about God's love. Thanks be to God. Amen.